Greetings and welcome to your journey as a supervisor here at Denver Seminary. In this short video, I want to give you a quick overview of two different supervision models that you can employ while serving students here at the seminary. One of those is the discrimination model, and the other is the integrated developmental model. And the information that you're going to see in this presentation comes from the book Fundamentals of Clinical Supervision by Bernard and Goodyear. So I'd like to start off with the discrimination model. With supervision, there are three basic areas of supervision or categories for supervision models. One is a theory-based model, which has the intent of simply passing on a theoretical model to the students. The other is a developmental model, and that's focusing on different intricacies of learning for the supervisee, and the integrated developmental model is one of those. And then there is a process model, which really works in and through observation of the supervision process with the supervisee. And that is the discrimination model. And that's where we're going to start here with this presentation. So the discrimination model was developed by Janine Bernard in the mid-1970s, and it's been modified and honed since then. And really, it aids supervisors in determining the best way to interact with their supervisee. It's pan-theoretical, so it works across different theoretical orientations. And for supervisors, it's one of the most, it's the model that's usually learned first. It's pretty accessible. In fact, for those models that suggest a supervisor role in supervision, it is one of the most researched models that do that. And so an overview of it simply is this. The discrimination model proposes three foci for supervisor skills, and then three roles of the supervisor. So what are the foci or the focuses of supervision skills for the supervisee? Intervention, conceptualization, and personalization. So an intervention, the idea is, what does the supervisee doing in a session that is observable to the supervisor? What skill levels are demonstrated? How are interventions being delivered, et cetera? And then there's conceptualization. How does the supervisee understand what is happening in the session? Are they able to make meaning of client statements? Are they able to recognize and interact with cultural identity and other social cultural issues, patterns of behavior, themes that are showing up? So how are they conceptualizing this particular client? And then personalization deals with, how does the supervisee bring in their own personal style while also not contaminating the process of counseling, right? And bringing in countertransference or personal issues in a way that's not beneficial to the client. There is also a fourth area of focus that has been suggested, which is that of professional issues, and that's where the supervisor would interact with the supervisee around issues that go beyond interactions with the client. So those the ethical issues, the cultural issues, the personal issues that come in alongside of the actual clinical work. So let's talk about the three roles then. Pretty simple: role of teacher, counselor, or consultant. So the teacher role is a role assumed when the supervisee needs a lot more structure. And so if you think about supervising a newer clinician, you're probably going to be doing some teaching. Okay. That's also going to line up with the integrated developmental model, level 1, which we'll see here in a little bit. And then the counselor role is a role that the supervisor assumes when they're, excuse me, striving to enhance affect in the role of the new trainee, so that they get out of their head a little bit and they can kind of see what's going on with them in the session. And then finally, the role of consultant. And that's a more of a collegial role where you're encouraging the supervisee to trust their own development and to kind of own and develop themselves as a clinician. So teacher, counselor, consultant, serving in the different focuses of intervention, conceptualization, or personalization. So what you see here is basically just a 3x3 grid of how these might interact for you as a supervisor with a supervisee. Now, the discrimination model is situation specific. So that means your role could change not just from one week to the next working with your supervisee, but actually within the session, you might move from teacher to counselor to consultant, or be focusing on conceptualization. So just real quickly, let me just read through these or hit a couple of these. So if you're in the role of teacher and focusing on intervention, you might model in supervision immediacy as a skill. Now, if you're serving as a consultant and working in the area of personalization, then you might address ethical issues rising from maybe a client infatuation with the counselor or something else that might be coming up. So you can see as a counselor, maybe you're um, addressing a supervisee fear of cultural nuances in the area of conceptualization. So any one of these 9 areas, you might find yourself interacting with your supervisee if you're working from the discrimination model. So the key here is don't get stuck in the teacher role or the consultant role. Attend to the needs of the supervisee and then meet them wherever they need to be met in the training. So again, just a quick summary, the discrimination model is highly accessible and popular, usually one of the first that is learned by a supervisor. You supervise from one of 3 roles in 3 areas of focus. And then Bernard and Goodyear say this, the discrimination model offers supervisors a relatively straightforward way to assess both successful and unsuccessful supervision interactions and identify, if needed, a different focus or role or combination of that for subsequent supervision session. So that's the discrimination model briefly, and then I'd like to go through the integrated developmental model next for you. Now, the integrated developmental model is a little bit more complex. It was developed by Stoltenberg and McNeil, and it's from the stage model perspective, it's the most widely used model. It's both descriptive of what's going on in the relationship with the trainee and prescriptive in the sense that the supervisor has an opportunity to speak into the actions of the supervisee. And it allows you to evaluate development through 4 stages, excuse me, or levels across 8 different domains and evaluating 3 separate structures of work of the clinician. So it's a little bit more complex and it's a little more detailed, but you get to do a little bit more of that work of a supervisor maybe with this than it would seem in some others. So what are the 4 stages or levels of IDM? Pretty straightforward. Level 1, 2, 3, or 3I. Now 3I just speaks to the ability to integrate across all the different domains and as you're working with your client. So, but you're just thinking, is my supervisee level 1, 2, 3, or 3I? Now, what are the 8 domains? The 8 domains of IDM are intervention, skills, competence, and that's really just the ability and competence to carry out the therapeutic interventions in a session. There's the domain of assessment techniques, which again is the supervisee's competence and ability to carry out basic assessments. There's interpersonal assessment, which goes beyond the formal assessments that we may use in a session and includes the use of self, the person of the counselor, in case conceptualization. And it's going to vary depending on where your trainee is theoretically. Considering client conceptualization, we're talking about diagnosis and understanding of how the client's circumstances, history, and characteristics affect their functioning. There's also individual differences, which is understanding of the social cultural influences that are at play with your client. And then the theoretical orientation. Is this trainee actually doing what they say they're going to do? If they're claiming to work from a narrative perspective, are they employing narrative therapy in their sessions? There's the domain of treatment plan and goals, which really just speaks to the idea of the clinician's ability to organize one's own efforts in working with the client and then putting those into practice. And then the 8th domain of professional ethics, which is the integration of professional ethics with their personal values working with their client. So there are 8 domains, and those 8 domains are evaluated in one of 3 structures. So the 3 structures then are the structure of self-other awareness, and this is both cognitive and affective. So this is evaluating the thought processes of the self and the clients, as well as being able to attune to one's own emotional changes through the sessions. There's the area of the structure of motivation. How motivated is your supervisee in interest to grow and expand clinically? And then thirdly, autonomy. And that just simply is speaking to the area of clinician independence in their work. So I've said that the integrated development model, the integrated developmental model is both descriptive and prescriptive. And the prescriptive part speaks to the use of supervisor interventions. Now, there are basically 5 different interventions that you would use as a supervisor within the integrated developmental model. The first are facilitative interventions, and this is just that pat you on the back, giving you some support and encouragement to the trainee. There are prescriptive interventions where you're giving specific advice and suggestions. You're maybe suggesting an intervention that aligns with the theoretical approach. There are conceptual interventions, which encourage the supervisee to view the client's issues from a variety of different angles. Okay. Confrontational interventions, those are the hard ones. Those are pointing out discrepancies in the supervisee's affect, their feelings, their attitudes, and actions within the counseling room. And then catalytic interventions, which are kind of more point in time interventions, focusing on the immediate events in therapy and in the supervision session. So that's the supervisor interventions. Now let's talk a little bit about what are these levels of supervisee. So a level 1 supervisee is someone who is new to training or new to a specific modality. Maybe they're entering into a new area of clinical work. So this supervisee is usually pretty highly motivated, wanting to seek the best approach with their client. They're low in autonomy because they need lots of supervisor feedback. They're new at this. And concerning awareness, there can be some confusion cognitively for the level 1 supervisee because they're just really focusing on, am I doing this right? And so they might miss some of their client stuff. So this supervisee, a level 1 supervisee, is going to benefit highly from those facilitative interventions. Hey, you're doing a good job. But they're also going to really benefit from the structure of prescriptive interventions. Hey, do this in the next time, or maybe this would be a good approach. And you can also, as a supervisor with this, with this group, begin to use some of the conceptual interventions, challenge their thinking a little bit, get them to think outside of the box while they're working with their clients. And then later on, remember this is developmental. As we're moving from level 1 to level 2, then maybe you can use some catalytic interventions and point out things with the clients or with the person of your supervisee that maybe they've missed in the session. So then there is the level 2 supervisee. Now, level 2 supervisee is no longer, ooh, look at that. There's a typo there. No longer a novice. They're no longer a novice. They've resolved a lot of the high dependence of a level 1 supervisee. Now, they're going to continue to benefit from those pats on the back, the facilitative interventions. There shouldn't be a lot, though, of the prescriptive interventions because they're growing, right? So the motivation of this supervisee is going to be up and down. Think of a teenager, right? They're just trying to figure it out a little bit. So they have some confidence and some insecurity. They are growing in autonomy. Again, that vacillation of, I think I can do this, but I want to make sure I'm doing it right. So maybe I'll ask for some input. And then awareness is really changing for this supervisee because they're not so focused on themselves. They have an opportunity to focus a little bit more on the client. So that's a really neat shift at this range of a level 2 supervisee. The real work here for you and for your client or for your supervisee is in that conceptual, confrontational, catalytic intervention role. So you're still active and you're still formative as a supervisor, but we're setting this one up to leave the nest a little bit, okay? And that's going to be when they transition into the level 3 supervisee. So this is a supervisee who's more advanced in training. Maybe they're out of their practicum, maybe they're in their second internship, or out of their internship altogether. But this is a trainee who is seeking to personalize their own approach to counseling, and they're really beginning to understand themselves as the person of a therapist. So motivation is consistent. No longer are there doubts or questions causing them to freeze in their work. Their autonomy is high. They're confident in their decision making. They're confident in the assessments that they choose, the interventions that they choose. And supervision is now beginning to transfer a little bit more to a collegial relationship. And again, the awareness of this supervisee is going to turn a little bit back more to themselves so that they can bring awareness of self and awareness of client together. So in here, at this level, Still, we're training, we're still supervising. So use those facilitative interventions, those pats on the backs and those that boys are great. Um, there should be fewer confrontational interventions in this range, but they would still be helpful if needed. And then the conceptual interventions, the catalytic interventions, those are going to be used for you to help this supervisee really establish who they are as a clinician and get them unstuck if they do get a little stuck. And then finally, the level 3I or the level 3 integrated supervisee is a supervisee who's a level 3, but they can go across any one of those 8 domains. Bernard says this supervisee is characterized by a personalized approach to professional practice across all the domains, and they have an ability to move easily across them. These supervisees have strong awareness of their strengths and weakness. And again, for this level 3I supervisee, very minimal intervention. Your relationship with the supervisee at this level is a little bit more peer oriented and consultative or collegial, as we've talked about before. So in summary of the IDM, this is a developmental model that provides an understanding of the level of the supervisee within structures of awareness, motivation, and autonomy across 8 domains of clinical work, and it allows for supervisor interventions with the supervisee. So if you're committed to this, you can become an expert in the integrated development model, even though it's a little bit more complex, but you got to put some work into it as a supervisor. Once again, let me thank you for being a part of supervision here at the Denver Seminary counseling program. Hope that these overviews of both the discrimination model and the integrated developmental model will facilitate your work here in a way that is very helpful to you and beneficial to your supervisees as well.